The end of July 2020, going to give you some information about CVTs on Suzuki AN650s. That's the Burgman model 650, whether it's the base model or the executive, which ends in an A. It's the same component. They've used the same CVT from 2002 on up. The difference on the early models is there is a different CVT adapter which goes right here. On the early models, 02 through 04, you have an adapter. It looks like this. This adapter is not on all the way. It's just sitting there, but this is what it looks like. It's pushed down on there. You can put it on or off. To take it off, you need a puller to get under it, pull it off. If you're replacing your CVT, make sure you know what year your bike is that you're working on. If it's an 02 through 04, you're going to have this configuration, and this is what you want to use. If you have a later model, the later model is going to have a much longer bolt. It's a 14 millimeter, and it is put on at the factory with about 200 plus foot-pounds of torque plus thread lock. It is a bear to get off. I'm going to show you how you get it off. You need to take this off on the later models, which is 2005 on up. Now, depending on when your bike was titled, it could be an 04, could be an 05, either way. Hold on. Bear with me, my photography skills are not the best, so bear with me. I'm trying to give you some good free information. This CVT, when it was put on, wasn't put on correctly. It was crooked just a little bit, and as a result, you can see what happened to the threads. The threads are rounded off, and to make it worse, when they took that 14 millimeter bolt, this is the one that was on the bike with the adapter. Since the CVT was on crooked, and the spline, that's a spline, this is a spline. Since this spline wasn't lined up, it wouldn't go in properly. It should fall in with a little bit of magic and a couple prayers. But what happened is they tightened up on this thing so tight it actually broke it off. Here's the bolt that was in there. You can see inside the spline is the other end of the bolt broken off. They destroyed the CVT. Destroyed the CVT pulley on this end. The CVT might be good inside. I haven't opened it up yet. See if the belt's any good. But the pulley itself is no good. They damaged it. Has to be replaced. So this is an example of what not to do. I'm going to show you in a little bit the proper way to install a CVT. First, I'm going to show you how to remove it. Before I get into removing it, if your bike's not running right, you got a couple things could be wrong that are not the CVT. The first one is on the swing arm in the back, just in front of the left shock absorber, is a sensor. That's a rear wheel speed sensor. Tells the computer that the bike is moving, and that will tell the computer whether or not it can shift or not. It actually controls the operation of the CVT. This sensor, which is not that expensive, it's under $100, they go bad. I've bought many Burgmans that the people were told by a Suzuki dealer that the CVT was bad. It only cost you $3,800 plus labor, when the only problem was this rear wheel speed sensor was bad. Here's a close-up of that rear wheel speed sensor. It's got a little short harness with this metal bracket, that the bracket keeps the wiring in place on the bike. The speed sensor has one little screw holds it on. On the right side is another sensor that has two screws. They go bad too. If it's not working properly, or even if you disconnected it, it will not engage the CVT. It'll be like it's in neutral. Here's a picture of that sensor. Two screws. It's got a spring-loaded little thingy right here that senses the speed of the crankshaft from the engine. There it is, under $100. Last but not least, there's a third sensor you want to check on. It's on the bottom of the CVT, just below the intake for the air. If it's bad, same thing. You're going to get all sort of sporadic operation, shifting. You might get F1 light, so forth. Check all three of these before you pull the trigger on a replacement CVT, I doubt it that you'll buy a new one from Suzuki unless you fell down, knocked on your head. Fourth item consider is the motor, which is used to control the the gear selection, so to speak. It doesn't have gears. Your CVT has a belt, one big belt. Your 400 does not. I think it has two belts either way. The belt for the 650 is inside of this monster component. You cannot change it without dropping the motor. You don't necessarily have to pull the motor, but you got to drop the whole thing far enough down that you can get this CVT off. You have 6 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're all 14 millimeter. They hold the CVT on the motor. Now, if it's an 02 through 04 that has the earlier CVT attachment, there's the look at that adapter again. If you have a really early bike, you don't have to take off anything other than your 6 bolts on the right side. The CVT will come off with a little bit of work. Again, on your later bikes, 05 on up, they all have a dust cover on the left hand side. I'll show you that in a second. Under this dust cover, if it's a later model, you're going to find that really long 6 or 7 inch 14 millimeter bolt with the CVT adapter. There's your dust cover. There's your long 14 millimeter bolt. Again, I can't stress any more than I have. If you have a later model 05 on up that has this adapter on the left, when you take the cover off, you'll see that bolt, and the end, this is what you're going to see right there. There's the money shot. You cannot get the CVT off after you take the 6 bolts off the right side. You have to drop the motor to get the top one because the frame's in the way. Once you pull those 6 14 millimeter bolts off, the CVT will not come off. You have to take this guy off. There's no way around it. It's put on with about 200 foot-pounds of torque at the factory. They do use thread lock. You got to stand on this thing. When you take it off, make sure that you use a 6-point socket, not a 12-point socket. If you look close at the head of the CVT adapter bolt, this long guy comes through the left. You'll see it's a 6-point bolt. Here's a 6-point socket. As you can see, it's exact fit. It cannot slip. If you use a 12-point, here's an example of a 12-point. It's not the same size, but it doesn't matter. You can see there's a possibility of it rounding off, breaking, or you damage the head of the bolt. Now, in order to break that 14 millimeter bolt off on the left side, with all those foot-pounds of torque, you got to stand on it, get a friend on your back. The easiest way I found, there's many ways of doing this, the easiest way I found is on the right side is this little screw cap. Take it off. Under that cap is another 14 millimeter bolt. You've got to keep that thing tight in order to get the other one off. This is what I recommend. Here's another 6-point deep socket with a ratchet and a long pipe. It's sitting on the frame of the bike. If you have a friend, help you. If not, put a bungee cord on it. That works just as well to hold it on tight. Make sure it's on tight and it's straight. I went out and bought the longest brand new ratchet I could find with a brand new high performance, high strength 6-point socket to do the job. There's the ratchet in the socket. Like I said, you need about 200 foot-pounds of torque to get this off. When you hear it first crack, you know you're in the money. It only takes about a quarter of a turn, and then it's loose. You can unscrew it by hand. That first quarter of a turn is a bear. Make sure you don't use a 12-point socket. You'll be sorry. Suzuki does sell a tool for doing the job. It's not cheap. It's a lot more expensive than a new ratchet, a new socket, and buying somebody lunch to come over and hold the other ratchet on the right side. All of those things are very inexpensive. When I was talking about eliminating the possible problems with your CVT, there's your CVT motor. There's where it goes. I've got them. I'll sell you one cheap. If you need to buy one from Suzuki, it's still a lot cheaper than a big, expensive CVT or even a used one installing it. You can check the motor and all 3 of your sensors, replace them without taking the engine apart, doing anything major to the bike. You can eliminate those 3 things. I would recommend doing that. We'll play a little game. One of these belts, both of them are out of a 650. One of them is good, one of them is not. One was abused. See if you can figure out which one it is. A or B. This is what can happen to a $300+ belt if you abuse your CVT. Take care of it, take care of your bike, keep your fluids changed. For those among us that think they know everything, this is actually what's inside of your CVT. There's your primary pulley. There's one of the plastic gears that's adjusted by the motor I just showed you. That gear is just sitting there, it's not in place, but that's what you're dealing with. It's a neoprene gear. Here's the outer cover with the secondary pulley. If I got those mixed up, I apologize. It has a cooling fan on. It brings air from the outside to keep your CVT cool. And put these 2 together with the belt. As you can see, it's an adjustable pulley. That's where the belt where the belt goes, in between there. There's the same outer case, or inside case turned upside down. There it is. A little tip to make your life easier if you're replacing your CVT. I made a little chart of the bolt numbers. I numbered them just by putting some little lines on it. Some of the bolts, you got 6 different bolts in probably 3 or 4 different sizes. Instead of trying to put the actual numbers, I just put some dots on there. As you can tell, 6 white dots is number 6, 4, 3 like that. Number 2 is this long silver one. I made a little chart. Up there in the corner is the motor marked with M, and then starting around in a circle is the 6 14mm mounting bolts for the CVT. Now, before you reinstall your old CVT that's been repaired or your new replacement, whichever the case is, this is a crucial tip. Get yourself an extra set of the longest bolts, at least 3 of them. Cut the heads off of them and put a slot in there with a grinding tool so that you can use a screwdriver. Now, what you want to do is put 3 of these in, sort of in a triangle shape, so that when you slide the CVT onto these bolts, it's going in at a proper angle, and your 2 male splines will be lined up properly so that they can mesh with the female splines on the engine. Now, they might not initially synchronize properly. You may have to wiggle the back wheel a little bit to get the one big one in. Hold on. These are your 2 splines again. You have this one here, goes in towards the clutch assembly, which is on the left of the bike, and then this one actually takes the power from the engine. You can see the threads on here. They're pretty fine. If this CVT isn't aligned properly with the bolts I showed you, that's well worth buying the bolts or get them from another shop that has an extra set. Pay what you got to pay and have those 3 bolts screwed into the motor before you start to slide your new CVT into place. You want these splines to line up perfectly, otherwise you end up with this, a ruined CVT. This CVT basically is now for parts. It could have been a good one, could have been a new one. Anyhow, that's what I have to offer for you. Scooterman here, trying to give you some advice. If you need any parts, you can call me direct. I'm at 443-370-6212. I have all parts for Burgman 650s. I got frames. I got frames with titles. I got motors. I don't necessarily sell CVTs, but I do have some CVT pulley parts and some covers. I don't sell belts, because if I got a good belt, I'm going to hold on to it. But I have just about anything else you need. Front end, wheels, you name it. Speedos, the odometer on these bikes is actually stored in the gauge cluster. So if you have a damaged bike and you have to or you have a bike with a bad gauge cluster and you want to replace it, I have gauge clusters that have odometer readings from 8,000 on up to 50,000. I got probably 20 of them. They're $200 a piece. But let me know what you need. I'll get it to you. I got a whole ton of painted mirrors, original painted colors. If you need a mirror, let me know. I'll get it to you a lot cheaper than Suzuki. And that's it. I'm signing off again. Call me direct. 443-370-6212. If you send me texts, I use a flip phone. Very difficult for me to text. You may or you may not get a response. I'll probably just tell you to call. That's it. Signing out. Scooterman here.